Of course, to an environmental school, and my children like will not recycle to save their lives, but that's a whole other story. Thank you for being here this evening. We are so excited that you are here. This is our final meeting for this SEL. We will probably meet with you in some form or another again, but this is our final official SEL group meeting tonight. And we're just thrilled for your presence here tonight. We have a packed agenda, so I will not talk long, but I just wanted to welcome you into the space. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to Vanessa.
Actually, it's going to be Beth. But we're okay. Sharon, can we get the slide deck up on so it's visible to folks? So while we work on that, there we go. Yay. You can move us to the next couple slides.
Great. And I'll just remind us all that the meeting's being recorded and it's due to Oregon's public meeting law. So just a reminder about that tonight. And I will hand it over to, it looks like, I think it's going to be me, actually, for the next slide. And just take a moment to look at our community agreements and maybe add to the chat which one, or maybe there's a couple different ones that you think that we've collectively did well throughout our journey together. Just take a look and see which ones and add those into the chat. Deirdre, keep hope. Thank you. Yes. Todd, challenge assumptions. Fran, be present. Jill, keep hope. Thank you. Holly, striving for growth. Daniel, keeping it local, personal, immediate. Tissia, I see your message. Thank you. Angela, keeping hope. Great. Andrea, challenge assumptions. Wonderful. Thank you all so much. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Vanessa.
Yeah, thank you for that, Beth. So our connection prompts today, we're going to do it on the chat because we do have quite a few conversations and review of materials and feedback, final moments of feedback that we want to capture from you all in this evening. And so anytime we close and say farewell is an opportunity to also reflect and think back on the journey that we've been. And it has been a journey, and through that journey, there have been tremendous gifts and opportunities to collaborate, share ideas. And so we're curious what this would all look like if we were to only use emojis as a way to capture what this journey has been for you all. So if you look down at the bottom of your bar, there's a more icon. And if you click on that, you'll see another word that shows up that says reactions. And then you'll have a whole set of different images. And we're just curious what image captures what we've been on together. And you can choose to have more than one, perfectly appropriate. And just to get a sense of how we're all reflecting back on this collective experience together. Annie. Yes, the brain just kind of exploding, right? Crazy. Ooh, I see you all are actually putting yours up on your images. Andrea, I'm very curious about the bunny, the rabbit. Oh, now a turtle too. Okay. Little egg, a little chick hatching. Deirdre, yes, I relate to the wave and the unicorn I'm confused by. Oh, I see. Trying to get a tortoise and hare thing going. I gotcha. And as you're populating the chat, if you want to unmute and talk about your image, feel free to do it in that way too. Fran, I love yours running. It feels like that's what we've been doing all along. Daniel, can you say more about the alien?
I just think it was like new territory for me. I've never been part of like an idea like this. So it all felt like how do we do this together in this format? Like is very unique and hard for me to kind of get my feet under me because of that, I think. Sometimes.
I love that. Other world, yes. A new world for many of us. And I like what Deirdre said. Yeah, much of what we're doing has been like a magical unicorn, right? Trying to make it all happen and come together has been quite a ride and magical also. Oh, Andrea, I love yours. Transformative, transformational change. Yay. Jill's using all the emoji faces. Looks like we're ending on a good place, on a happy place. Awesome. Skating by, Todd. Love it. Well, thank you. It's nice to sometimes not use language to be able to express ourselves. And so really interesting to see everyone's view of what it's been like. All right, and we will pass it on to Amy.
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa. Nice to be here with you all again tonight for our last meeting. Kind of feel like we should try to do a report revision all in emojis, see how that would go. But instead of doing that, tonight we will do a final review of the report. If you'll remember, last time we took consensus votes on the recommendations, and so we won't revisit all of the recommendations because we were at consensus on them. There are a couple additions from since last time that we will take a consensus vote on, but only those pieces that we didn't vote on last time. And then we'll have time to discuss any remaining concerns or needed clarifications. So the hope with this piece is just if there's something you're holding that you want to make sure it gets said in the group, or there's something you feel like needs clarification, now would be the time to do that, to voice those for any final edits that the ODE team will make before turning this into the state board. And again, we've reached consensus on the content of the recommendations, so we should all feel good about that. But if there are questions that you're holding about other pieces of the report or needed clarifications, we'll get into that tonight. And then we'll spend time, Vanessa will share some next steps to get your feedback on. And then we'll hopefully end with some appreciations for this group and all the work you all have put in over the months, many months. So that's our plan for this evening. And Vanessa, if you wanted to share a little bit of more clarity on this group's role and the next steps.
Yeah, thanks for that. So if we can move to the next slide, just want to contextualize where we fit at this particular juncture right now in terms of the report and what happens next. So in terms of the State Board of Education, right, this was all written into the statute that this advisory group will submit a report to the board that describes the proposed standards and framework on September 15th of 2022. So that's our deadline that we're coming up on and that we're putting our final touches on the report for that to happen. And then this report will be part of the informational presentation to SBE on September 22nd. So we're still trying to figure out who, how many folks can be part of that presentation. So we will let you all know once that is landed on. And thank you, all of you that have expressed interest in being part of that presentation. And it's really an opportunity for us to share a little more in detail what the recommendations are for the standards and framework. And then the language here for the State Board of Education is that they shall consider this report when adopting the standards and framework. So what that means is in this next phase, as we start to pivot into creating a new advisory group that will actually take these initial recommendations and then create the standards and the framework, that this will be really kind of their guiding post as we move along in that work. And so that next phase of work will happen between October and June of 2023. So we'll have those months, that time to really develop all of that work and then present it to the State Board of Education no later than September 15th of 2023, at which time this report will be shared again with the State Board of Education as they consider these recommendations. So those are all kind of the moving different parts of how we're fitting this puzzle together.
Great. Are there any questions out there about what we're up to tonight, or any clarifying questions for Vanessa or the team before we move on? Yeah, I see do we have enough people for quorum? By my count, we did. Is that right, Vanessa?
I have not checked yet, so I will look into that, but it looks like we do.
Yeah, Alexa says, yes, I think we do. And yay, no one can leave. Uh-huh. I think we are good. Confirmed, we're at quorum. Perfect. Okay. Any other questions? Yay. Okay, great. If you think of things as we go, feel free to put them in the chat. If we go to the next slide, Sharon. Okay, so we're going to spend a good portion of our meeting doing some final review of the report, like I mentioned. So we'll start. Vanessa's going to talk through some of the changes that were made and additions. Then we'll take a consensus vote on those small additions to the recommendations. So again, we did consensus votes on all the recommendations last time, and we're at consensus. We're only going to be voting on the additions that have been added since last time. So we'll do that at the outset. And then we'll give you about 15 minutes to do some more individual review. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at the full report before tonight. 15 minutes is not long enough to read the entire report. It'll give you a chance to go back to sections you maybe want to spend more time with, or that you might have had questions on before, you want to check something. So you'll have 15 minutes with the report on your own. And then you'll have 5 minutes about to process that reflection time and name any outstanding questions you have. If there are points that you think need additional clarification, you can raise those. And then we'll spend about 25 minutes, and we have a little longer if we need it, to get into discussion on any of those final questions or needs for clarification. So we'll walk through your comments in the Google Doc like we've done in the past and have some discussion about pieces. We'll check to see if we have, if there's agreement on making edits or additions, clarifications, and then we will leave that in Vanessa and team's capable hands to make those edits in the final report. So that is the plan for the bulk of the time tonight. If we want to get into those changes, let's start there.
All right, let's dive in. So yeah, if we can get to the next slide, this really captures all of the work that has happened between when we last met and then today's meeting. And so we are so thankful for the added and additional content folks on the advisory group that contributed to the report. So you can see that there's an added section around brain science. So thank you, Annie and Todd, for that. That is now kind of towards the beginning of the report to frame our thinking. And then thank you for all of you that contributed to examples for both the school and district level. I think it's really helpful to be able to say and name what this looks like in practice. So both Annie and Jill provided really excellent ideas and approaches to really embodying social emotional learning in system work, and then also at the classroom level. And then Jim Hansen added and contributed to this idea of this 4-quadrant model that we talked a lot about in our smaller groups, right? The I, the we, and that collective and individual components and how those fit into social emotional learning. So that has been now added into the report. And then ODE has had a real mighty editing team. This has been a lot of work. So just to say thank you to all of the behind the scene folks that you don't actually see right here on this call that have really contributed to making sure that all of these editing pieces have been taken care of before the report goes public. So some of the things that we've been attending to are just having consistent language, formatting, and citations throughout the report, fixing any kind of grammatical or syntax mistakes along the way. And then you'll see that some of the organization has changed. So the content hasn't, but we've just kind of moved things around in terms of where it made the most sense. And so ideas are really building on each other. And then we've looked at each of the sections and quotations to make sure we're citing them correctly and not having just lots of body of text that we're lifting from different sources. So really fine tuning and paraphrasing a lot of those pieces. And then thinking a lot about accessibility and readability of images and charts. So you'll notice that some of those look a little bit different. And for the recommendations section specifically, we've clarified some of the language that these are recommendations that will be considered once phase 2 is finalized. And so we're just trying to match the language with the actual bodies of work that happen across time. Because SBE won't be actually acting on this report in September. That'll really happen in September of 2023. So just making sure that our phrasing captures those phases of the work as it continues to evolve. And then as Amy has shared, there has been some internal feedback. So this was shared with the executive team at ODE to have them look over our recommendations and the report itself. And I've sat in on some of those meetings and it's been very well received. So just want to name that there's acknowledgement of all the tremendous work, and just the way that we've approached this has really resonated internally with ODE folks. And so you'll see that there are just a couple of things that Colt has highlighted that we want to just pay attention to as we look through these recommendations with those suggestions in mind. So that's part of what we'll be voting on later today. So with that, I think the best way to do this is if we can all hop on the document itself, and I'll add it in the chat here. And if we can draw our attention specifically to page 54 of the document, we can make our way down there. We're going to go to those specific parts that are in reference to the recommendations and that the executive team has suggested we consider in terms of making changes. All right, I see most of us popping on here at this time. So what you'll see, and I called it out as in comment form, is on implementation considerations and opportunities. There's an addition of item B. So the suggestion was to include this piece, that as we're considering implementation, we're going to be coordinating with the early learning division. to align to the kindergarten guidelines that include SEL, especially those that cross over from early learning to K-12. So just thinking about the systems coordination and alignment. Yes, I can totally share my screen. Okay. So this bullet item would be in addition to the recommendation. So thinking specifically about how we align to the early learning division SEL standards. So that's one proposed change. And then still keeping with the implementation, we originally had just some offices, and the suggestion is that we include these other offices as well as part of the way to align and coordinate with each other in ODE. So that's a second suggestion, to add these offices with whom to work with. And then the last one is down here, again, still with implementation. So the proposal is that initially this was SBE. So to support implementation, the advisory group recommends that ODE encourage the Quality Education Commission, QEC, to integrate SEL implementation into cost modeling when it updates the QEM and request regular reports at its public meetings from the QEC regarding updates to the QEM. So what we're asking here is that really it would be ODE's responsibility to encourage this. So instead of SBE to change it to ODE. So those were the suggestions from ODE's executive team. Any questions about those?
This is great, Vanessa. This is Todd. When it says OD encourages, does that really mean anything?
That is, I'm not an expert on the QEC, so I don't know if Alexa or Amy, if you can take that question.
Do you want to start, Alexa?
No, you can start.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's
Good
a
question,
fair
Todd.
Like, I
It's
don't
a
know what
fair-
encourages means. I mean, like, hey, let's all play together nicely until people punch each other. And then it's like, wait a minute, that's not happening. So I don't know what the relationship between ODE and the QEC. Is it more of integrating SEL into QEC's work, or, you know, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I think the hope here is that because what the Quality Education Commission does through the QEM, sorry, SBE is the State Board of Education, address to the State Board of Education. So what the Quality Education Commission is tasked with is deciding how much does it cost to give students in Oregon a quality education. And so they look at the costs of all sorts of programming, from literacy and math to having enough staff, all the pieces you need to have a quality education. And so this piece is in specific an encouragement to incorporate SEL implementation. So what is the cost of SEL implementation, and making sure that that gets worked into the quality education model in the future. So when you ask whether encouragement does much, I think it's a fair question. I think what this report is attempting to name are like, what are the things that need to be considered in implementation? What are the things we're suggesting be considered in implementation to make sure this framework and recommendations really have the impact that we're intending for students? And so my perspective is I think there is value in having this in the report and naming it. I don't know if, I think at this point there isn't, because the State Board of Education is not adopting this in the moment, having stronger language that wouldn't necessarily get us any further than naming it here in the way we do. That it's helpful to have it in any form to name that it's an important piece. But I don't know if Alexa, if you want to say more or different on that.
I would just say that I think ODE's role is as an advisor in the role for the membership of and I just put the reports in there for some context. So I don't know if, in terms of the word choice of encourage, I don't know if we're able to include more, stronger language, if that's what you're asking, Todd. So again, I think we're one of the advisors. I think Colt is the advisor to the commission in that. So we're encouraging them to, ODE to put forth SEL as one of the, and I think it is about, clearly SEL is ODE's put forth this policy option package to have this bill come forward. So I know it is a strong value of the agency.
That's helpful. I mean, I kind of knew the answer, unfortunately, but it just doesn't mean a whole lot. But I also don't know who has leeway and support and privilege over whoever else, and how do you really foster this to integrate it? Because that QAM thing is about, are we funding this well, and are we providing the supports that people need to do this well? So encouraging versus coordinating with, or sometimes, we can play with that language. But anyway, we don't have to, I'm belaboring enough. Thank you for answering that question. Appreciate it.
Great. So we are going to take a consensus vote on those three pieces together. So the three pieces again, do you mind just sharing one more time, Vanessa?
Yeah, sure thing. Do you mean my screen or the three
Yes.
things?
Yes.
Okay.
I think your screen, so we can talk through the three things one more time. So the three pieces, we'll take a consensus vote on all three changes together. Are adding, coordinate with the early learning division to align the kindergarten guidelines that include SEL, especially those that cross over from early learning to K-12. The second is in D, adding coordinate with the Office of the Director, Office of Teaching, Learning and Assessment, Office of Indian Education, Office of Equity, Diversity and Inclusion, Office of Enhancing Student Opportunities, and Office of Education, Innovation and Improvement to align the district needs related to SEL and mental health. So just naming the additional offices there. And then the last one again is changing that number 3 recommendation for the advisory group, recommending that ODE encourage the Quality Education Commission as opposed to the State Board of Education encouraging the Quality Education Commission. So before we take that vote on all three pieces together, any other questions, clarifications, concerns? Okay. So I'm going to put in the chat, the Google Doc will be in tonight. This is our only consensus vote of the evening. So the one chart at the top, and we'll do what we did before, which is have you put in your name and a vote from 0 to 5. And again, in our consensus voting, a 0 means that you can't support it and you'd block it. Up to a 5, meaning you strongly support, have no reservations. And anything above a 3 means that you are okay with it moving forward, feel like it supports the work. All right. Yeah, well, it looks like we had all 5s and a couple 4s, or 1 4 in there. So we do have consensus. I know there were a few members who maybe did not vote yet, but I think we have the number we need. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12. Yeah.
Amy, I think Leticia needs to be able to have access to the document.
It should be.
Yeah, I've been having with my computer today with everything, audio, and even now the link so it's not letting me access anything now. And it matches me be my computer.
Okay, yeah, because the document should be open to anyone with the link. If you're able to message Vanessa or Sharon, you could tell them your vote through the chat. Are you able to do it that way? Okay, great. Okay. Perfect. Well, good work, everyone. So we'll adopt those changes to the recommendations. Woo! Those will get added in or are added in. We'll take out the comments. Good work. Okay. So thanks for adding Leticia in there. So now we want to give you 15 minutes to spend time with the report. And if you're still in that Google Doc, after you spend 15 minutes with the report, you'll have time to write out any reflections, anything that's confusing or unclear, or any outstanding concerns or questions about the report as a whole. If you can't access this document again, you could chat these things to Vanessa when we get to that point. But so that's where we're headed, is to put things in the document, but we're going to give you a full 15 minutes to spend time with the report. Again, that's not enough time to read the full report, so hopefully you have read it, but you can spend 15 minutes digging deep in certain sections, or if there is a piece that you had questions about before or offered edits to, you can come back to those sections. So it is 5:03 now, so we'll come back at 5:18 and go from there. That's all. Thanks, Shane. If you haven't already started to put reflections into the document, it's underneath where we took the consensus vote. I'll put the link in the chat again, and we'll take another 5 minutes so you can reflect anything in here. Again, we're asking, is anything confusing or unclear? Do you have any outstanding questions or concerns? So really trying to, like, any major flags you want to clarify here, knowing we've reached consensus on the content of the recommendations. But if there's anything you want to make sure it gets clarified, or you're still holding some confusion about something, this is the place to name it. And then we'll walk through together as a group. So take 5 minutes here. I'll go till 5:24. Okay, I know some of you are still typing, and that's all right if you want to finish up what you're sharing there. And we'll start walking through.
Amy, I just want to take a moment that Subin had to leave. His daughter needed some attention and care right now, so he needed to take care of that. So he just says goodbye and wishes all well.
Thank you.
And Leticia is not able to access the document. So Leticia, if you want to add anything to the chat, we can add it that way, or you can verbally share anything that is concerning or questions that you have that you want to surface.
Thank you.
Okay.
No, I actually don't have. It's just my computer's just decided to act up.
Ugh, so frustrating.
I'll be here.
Thanks for
Very
being
frustrating when we're all virtual. Okay, so as we walk through these, I just want to ground us again in, like, there are likely things in here because of your experience and expertise that you have feelings about how it should be implemented or thinking forward to what this looks like in the next phase. And all of that's welcome. And we're going to try to really focus on what we need to say in this document at this time. If there's anything that needs to be clarified or added at this point in the work. So all that to say, there may be some of these we walk through and we're just going to hold that there's a tension here, or there's a concern about implementation that may get worked out in the next phase or in conversations with districts. And some of them might lead to specific conversations about additions or clarifications. Okay, so I'm going to screen share so we can all look together. And so Leticia can see too. Okay, so starting at the top here, Jen, I'm clear on what section B really means. So section B says advisory group recommends the framework include the implementation guidance below, and then B says implementing SEL requires trained adult professionals who have deep knowledge and skills around social emotional learning. Districts should consider whether the ratios of students to trained staff are adequate to meet the needs of their students. So I think what I'm reading here is a concern that even if we're saying that, a lot of districts don't necessarily have the resources to be able to do that or to hire the people they need. I'm curious, Jen, if there's or others, if there's a specific change you're thinking about in this piece, or what might help with the clarification here.
Well, I don't think I would have wrote it if I had a good solution, actually. It's just something that we're wrestling with all the time. And I think we always consider it. So, but we don't do anything about it. So I think the statement that districts should consider is almost pointless.
You don't feel hope about it in the considerations. Yeah. I don't know if I read that in other pieces too, but I think there is some, maybe even in Daniel's comment below, this sort of like, we can name a vision, but we also know from the reality and experience that it is often hard to live up to that vision. I think that's a tension that we're going to hold in a lot of places in this report, like name what our ideal is. And then we all work, ODE works to try to get more funds to do this in a way that makes the implementation as real as possible. But I hear you, Jen, there are some pieces that feel like we've said this before, and saying it doesn't mean it will happen necessarily. Do others have any?
No, and I appreciate that, Amy. I know that I'm singing to the choir. I just, you know, we have these positions and we can't fill them. We don't have enough individuals to fill them. So, and you know, we have teachers that don't have teaching license and or even college degrees at the moment. So it's it is a struggle. So, but thank you for acknowledging it. I don't necessarily need a change.
Can I add a slightly hopeful bit?
Sure, add some hope, Dad.
Real quick, so we've had this work in Southern Oregon, but using our university partner, Southern Oregon University, they helped us develop a micro credential. It was actually targeted towards non-licensed folks, so that if they were staff that we have working with kids, to tool them up and equip them, but it's a stacking credentialing program, so they could stack it towards actually maybe earning a degree or something like that. But SEL was a core factor, trauma-informed practices was a core factor. So there are a whole raft of classes for people to take, from 1 credits to multiple credits. But we're seeing folks take that on as like giving them skills to do this work. Because to Angela's point in the chat, all the adults are supposed to be doing this work and integrated. And so, not that it's the answer, Jen, but it is an answer. And we think there might be some traction there that higher ed could help us with this.
Great. Yeah, and I think this point, and then there's other language about adults too, sort of walks this line of, yes, everybody should be trained to do SEL, and also appreciating school counselors, psychologists, TOSAs who are specifically trained to support staff and students in SEL.
Sorry, I have a question I'm wondering about.
Yeah, Annie.
Are people feeling like that's not being clear though, that we're asking that everyone is doing SEL work? Is that the
Yeah, so you're asking if that's unclear in the report in general?
right? Or does it feel like we're asking, does it feel like we're asking it to be an add-on of additional people, and that, or does it feel like overall arching that we, like, everyone is supposed to be doing the work?
Yeah, I don't know if anyone else wants to jump into this. My sense of the complete report and recommendations is that the system standards really name all adults in the system being prepared to support social emotional learning. And what we've said here, I'll pull up the final draft too in the recommendations. Sorry, I'm going to make everyone dizzy for a second. In the standards recommendations is we talk about I can, we can statements. And we talk about adults being able to dialogue, reflect, deep understanding. So my sense of it is that in total, the framework is both about students and all adults supporting SEL. And then there's some specific additional implementation guidance that goes into how we make sure this gets implemented well, which names specifically ratios and adults being trained to support other adults.
In my experience, if it's not explicitly called out, then there's room for large interpretation. So those statements that you just called out doesn't really address that all adults should be responsible for it. So I am listening and processing, and I think that needs to be added somewhere in here.
I agree.
So thanks, Annie. I was really listening, and I think those things aren't there. So
okay, so I'm hearing a request to call out to say something more about all adults in some of the recommendations. So we do have, I'm looking at the system standards now. Systemic conditions required for students and adults to grow and develop SEL competencies. Student standards alone without explicit attention to adult SEL has the potential to promote a deficit mindset. But I'm hearing there's a desire for something different or more. Okay, does someone want to offer a suggestion for what that looks like?
Annie.
I think it's just like SEL is the responsibility of all adults in the learning community.
Ooh, I like that.
All right, let's flag it up here. Vanessa, are you in the document? Do you want to flag something in the student standards? the system standards, the SEL's responsibility of all adults.
Okay, so where
Just
are you
make a
seeing-
note of it, I think, at the top where I'm sharing here. To add a line that says SEL is the responsibility of all adults.
What page are you on? The screen is really small.
51.
I got it. I put it on there.
Okay, thanks, Annie.
Yeah, and I don't know if you'd want to add this because it might sound a little like too much of a flourish, but I mean, I think that we all focus as a community, individually and collectively, like essentially SEL is the ultimate inclusive community of practice because we're all like on continuums and we're all working on it, right? It's a beautiful generative space to engage in our learning, right? In adult communities and with students together as like people who are also curious and developing in all of these ways.
Mhm. Yeah, is there something in addition, Daniel, that you're wanting to see named in the content?
I'll ponder it and drop it in the chat when it coheres.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, looking at it, so like the I can, we can, that's really about standards written beyond privileging individualistic cultures.
Mhm.
And then saying it's a responsibility of all adults doesn't quite get at it, but being more specific, like, and I know we've gone around and around and around this particular topic, but that standards, the SEL standards are also intended for adults to be practicing, modeling, embodying, developing, growing along with students, something like that. As opposed to, because if we say it's the responsibility of all adults, then that could mean just to make sure all the kids are implementing or that I know what competencies are, but
Mhm.
specifically stating that this is, it's a lifetime work and the adults need standards as well. I mean, I know I'm oversimplifying that, but something like that.
No, I hear that. And I'm wondering the best place for it, because I'm thinking about this initial piece is described as the student standards. So if we go back to our, sorry, make you dizzy for a second again, our framework here. So we have the student standards fundamentals, the system standards fundamentals, which are around systems, adults, training, support, and then the guiding principles and the implementation, which stretches across both. So what we've said in the student standards recommendations, where we just were, is specifically the integration, the braiding of the CASEL competencies and the T-cell focal constructs, which these are all still about student standards. And then we've named, which goes beyond what was requested of this group in some ways, is like, in addition to student standards, we've said, we know that student standards can't exist on their own because adults and systems are fundamental to supporting students. And we know all adults are responsible for SEL. And so we're going to name some of the things that we think are necessary to support implementation. So we've named things around supporting educators, licensure, positive identity and development, school culture. We've named community collaboration relationships. We've named a state role. And so I think what I'm hearing is a desire to be more explicit, maybe in these system standards, to name what you just shared, Jill, around the in addition to the student standards? Is that what you're saying, Jill, is maybe there's something more here around adults?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm looking at it thinking.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if at the bottom of page 51, when we talk about the adults, the importance of adult SEL and the potential to promote a deficit mindset, that it has to be grounded in racial equity, right? Implicit bias. I wonder if that's the spot.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, just an explicit sentence, and it is good, you do definitely call some things out below, but just a sentence there in that alone without explicit attention to adult SEL.
Mm-hmm.
Potential. So we say if you don't do it, here's what can happen. So maybe a sentence that says, therefore, we recommend that explicit adult SEL professional learning is provided.
Mm-hmm.
That's as my brain can't come up with the words, but is provided alongside working, learning about how to implement it for students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Annie named here SEL standard as supports for adults to be growing alongside with students. SEL work happens across the lifespan. So maybe we can continue tweaking that, Vanessa, to get more explicit about adult behavior too, in the lead up to the other system standards.
Can I just jump in about the adult SEL piece? I feel like we're kind of marrying together two things that are actually separate. There's like the adult SEL of, are they cultivating their own well-being and their own competencies? And then there's the the ability for the adults to implement SEL. And I think we haven't separated those in this document where, we talk about supporting adult SEL, but we don't really call out that we're focused on supporting adults' well-being and cultivation of their SEL, but we also want there to be, training and this expectation that they learn how to implement SEL. And to me, those are two different things that are not differentiated here.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. Not to belabor the point, but that in working with my district, and that it has become an issue or a question, like, is this an HR around adult wellness? That's one thing, but then where is the intersection of SEL and the implementation of SEL? So finding a way to call those out, I think are helpful, would be helpful.
Yeah, so we do have this specific one here around promoting their own social and emotional wellness and mental health and well-being for supporting educators. And then I'm hearing this request to name more specifically around how adults grow in SEL standards, like how the competencies, how the focal constructs relate to adults as well as students.
No, actually, their skills at teaching SEL and implementing SEL.
Yeah.
Not their knowledge of the constructs, but their actual, like, how do they do this stuff with kids?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so wanting to make sure support for teaching SEL and adults' own SEL are both called out in the report. Yeah.
If I could just be very, very blunt, it's something that addresses the issue that there is going to be a contingent of folks who say, this isn't my job, and I'm not going to do it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, Vanessa, does it feel like you have enough to edit this intro to the system standards to capture both
Yeah,
of those pieces?
I think so. I'm gonna need some time, but
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, I think part of what our challenge is in this space too is we're tasked with presenting an initial framework and standards and student standards. And the next group is going to get into more detail about what those look like before the state board takes them up to adopt. And then what's named in here also is support for implementation. So what it looks like to support adults in that, what it looks like to support adults in both working with students around SEL and supporting adults' own social emotional learning. So I think we want to get out what we want to name as the ideal and also hold that there's so much more to be done to capture a lot of these points you all are making too.
And I just want to share, I'm really appreciative. I'm getting lots of private messages saying, I'll help you, I'll be your thought partner. So
Great.
thank you. So maybe what I'll do is just set up a time, and for folks who can make it, that would be great to have multiple group members, advisory group members to co-create that together.
Perfect. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break because it's 5:45 and then we'll come back at 5:50. We'll work through some more of the conversation in here and then we'll get into closing and appreciations. So 5 minutes until 5:51. Thanks, Sharon. All right, welcome back. So we had to lose, Jen had to go and Holly has to go at 6. So we're gonna keep going in the conversation. The conversation about next steps in the next group, Vanessa's gonna send out an email about those things so that we have more time for discussion right now. So let me share screen again. And I'm gonna actually go down to the end here. So there's some of the comments in here that I think Vanessa can take and make small edits or follow up with you if there are particular questions. Like these ones, Jim and Holly, people not defined by their trauma, making sure we have school psychologists in there. A paragraph that maybe seems a little bit out of place. So I'm going to keep going up here. So this comment here about the relationship between the castle and the T-cell and the relationship between the two. So what's in the report now, that grading is what had a consensus vote at the last meeting. There was a previous iteration that had the T-cell focal constructs as primary, and there was not consensus on leaving it that way. There was discussion about it, and then the change to them just being a braid or being integrated is what we talked about at the last meeting and what had consensus vote. So we won't revisit the full how it's defined. It also will be the next group's task to get more clear on what that means and looks like and what those standards actually are with grades. But given that there were a few of you that had questions about this or comments, is there anything in particular, without redefining the relationship, because we've already reached consensus on that, anything that would help with clarity or anything you just want to share about your concerns here?
I guess I'm the obvious person to speak about that. So I understand that consensus was reached around it. I am just, these two frameworks exist in cohesion with one another, created by the same group of people. And so I think it's really important that we articulate them in the ways that they were articulated by the people that created them, because we're not taking one framework and another framework and trying to put them together ourselves. Like, they actually do exist together, and the T-cell model was built out of the original one. And so I'm just questioning the way that we are accurately depicting the way that these frameworks were articulated by the people that created them. So I'm fine with leaving the braid thing. I think that there's a lot of backtracking and on the braid, and that and this could absolutely be the work of the next group. So I'm just gonna keep calling to light that I think that we need to be careful about creating our own interpretation of how these two frameworks exist or coexist when they actually they already coexist. Like, T-cell was built out of that. So there is an accurate way to talk about their integration. It isn't up to our interpretation, in my opinion.
Thanks, Deirdre. Vanessa, did you want to say anything more about that? Or
Yeah, I just want to say that we're in conversation with Castle, being part of the CSI schools. So we have been having conversations, and there isn't a direct path to what those look like from our conversations. So it's something that we're continuing to explore together, and something certainly that we can and will bring up as we start doing the standards work in this next phase.
Awesome. That sounds like the answer.
Great.
Perfect. Okay, and then the small thing here. And then
I think those are, yeah, I think you already got that.
I think, yeah, connected to what you shared earlier about all adults and all students. Okay. Anything that I didn't call out that people feel like needs more discussion?
Sorry, me again. There was a section in my comment about the evaluation and assessment that was added since our last meeting. And I feel like that wording is tricky, evaluation assessment. And I was wondering if we would prefer to change that to like examining systems of continuous improvement. But I know this was added somewhat recently, so I always worry about assessment evaluation and the weight that those bring to these things.
Yeah, thanks, Deirdre. I think that was definitely part of the conversation last time. There was some like the big feelings about assessment and evaluation, and part of why this got A through E underneath it around not perpetuating harm and such. But I wonder if others feel similarly, or are there other suggestions for editing 7?
I think the group who was part of that spent a lot of time thinking about the intentionality about having that particular section in there. I know that I was part of that group and feeling like that needed to have a special attention called to it.
Yeah. Andrea, I see you had a comment in there too about some finalizing, polishing. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, and I'm sorry I had to transition to my phone. Got to get to soccer practice. Just agreeing with Holly, we had a very lengthy discussion about what we meant, and went back and forth about whether or not we use the word assessment and evaluation, which is why we ended up adding the expanded section. And because it's the newer section, as I was reading through the document, just that section still felt like it needed just some additional wordsmithing and fine tuning and polishing. Like just some grammar things, nothing in particular. But I do feel strongly that we need to keep that section based on the conversation we had last month.
Okay. So more about like fleshing out a bit A through E, making sure the wording is matching the tone and the rest of it.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm happy to also work on that offline if need be. So.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else on that piece? We lost. Okay. I see your comment, Jill, around suggesting adding continuous improvement. So it would say supports the assessment, evaluation, and continuous improvement of SEL implementation. Do others feel strongly one way or the other about adding continuous improvement? All right, saw a thumb up, and I saw Deirdre and Holly and Jim, Andrea. All right. Our non-formal sense of it is yes, we can add continuous improvement here. Okay, great. Well, unless there is anything else that we didn't get to, and please tell me if there is in here. I think we are ready to move on to closing, to appreciations, and thanking you all for the work you've done. So just pause for a second. Anything else you feel like needs to be said or we didn't address, you want to make sure the ODE team knows they need to come back to before we go there. Okay. Well, excellent work on the report, everybody. I think Vanessa has some things to come back to and some conversations and follow-up to address some of the remaining questions and concerns. I think we're in good shape as a group. So thank you all for digging into those final pieces. And I think we can move into appreciations and turn it over to Alexa.
This is the best part. I get all the good stuff. I just, yeah, this sums it up right here. But as I was thinking about what to say today, I was thinking about when we interviewed Vanessa, we asked about, for this position, we asked a question about the vision. And she had this image all the way through of like hiking. You probably remember it from a lot of our slides, and the mountain. And honestly, I feel like that was so daunting, of like, I kept thinking, how are we going to get there? Like, where? This seems far away. And it was bumpy at first. Like, I felt like, I mean, I'm just to be really honest, because this is about social emotional learning, and my honest truth was my dad had just died. And I came back to this work really just like, here's a bill you have to implement, and which was a gift to implement. And I was excited about it. And it was like, okay, how do we do this? And what does this look like? I was a school principal, I was a school leader, I was a teacher, but I have not, this was new to me. How does a 30 people group write a report together? And so it was bumpy at first, and you all stayed with us along the way. Like, I was unprepared for the journey. I will just tell you. So we needed to get somebody to hire on, which was great. And Beth Wiggum did a beautiful job of holding this all together and getting everything set up, so that when Vanessa started, she was able to hit the ground running. And one of the very first things that Vanessa did was, I said, this is not going well and we need your help. And you just need to listen to people. And one of the first things she did was connect with people. Fortunately, we worked with the Comprehensive Center as well. Carmen Zamora Urbina helped us with that contract to bring Sea Change on. Sea Change, Amy Craig and Pooja Bhatt, they help us think through the meeting ahead of time. Just saw this beautiful, complicated work of everybody giving feedback. Like, I was like tracking the conversation I wanted to add in, but just watching the facilitation happen. We've learned side by side from them. They pushed our thinking, and then spent time reflecting this with afterwards. But the true work has been the relationships and the trust that you've given us to be able to work through this report. So Vanessa and I actually did like a read aloud read through. We're not quite halfway through, maybe like a quarter way through of just word by word read through, fine tuning, and we'll go back and continue that. But I can't tell you how proud the agency is of the work of this group. I know Colt wanted to be here tonight. He had a family situation that he has this evening, but he has asked me to share the gratitude. I will say, he is a wonderful human being, and he's not always effusive with praise, and he was effusive with praise for this and the work you've done together. Same with Jennifer Patterson, who's my boss. And so I just really, from the bottom of my heart, can't thank you enough. And I know that you'll be with us as we continue this work. So thank you. Thank you for staying with us, for trusting us, for sharing your insight. And then even now, like, here you are like, oh, we'll offer more help, like private texting Vanessa. So just thank you. I have the best job to be able to say thank you to you. And so I really hope you feel good about this work. And please, we'll ask you for feedback. We know we can do better. And so we'll continue to try to improve, but thanks for being with us on this hike. We like made it to one summit, and now I feel like, oh, it's the next summit that we have to make now. But you can be alongside us and cheering us along the way, but it'll make a difference. This is the type of legislation and the way that you centered equity and anti-racism in the work that we did. This is gonna be a game changer, so thank you. Oh, good. Yeah, now we get to see each other's faces. So I was like looking at your awesome slide. But it's really much better to see faces.
Thanks, Alexa. Well, we wanted to give you all a chance to appreciate each other. I know some people are more comfortable doing that verbally, and some people might want to write their appreciation. So we created a little Jamboard. If you would like to share appreciations, either a reflection on your time together, an appreciation for a particular group member, or a particular conversation that was had over the time. You all committed quite a bit of time and energy to this process, and it feels important to really honor that, appreciate the work that you all put into this, and again, the time and energy just put into these conversations and this product at the end. So take a few minutes if you want to put a sticky note on the Jamboard, or if you'd like to share verbally, that's totally welcome too. And we'll just spend about 4 minutes here.
And I should have said, I forgot a person, Sharon has been behind the scenes helping us too. So I want to make sure I say something about Sharon.
Thank you, Sharon. Daniel, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say, Deirdre, I really appreciate a lot of things about your role here. Like the levels of discernment you bring to conversations are really important. And also groundedness, like to lovingly focus on what's most relevant to this part of the process, which I have a terrible time doing. So I appreciate you. You help, just speaking for myself, like kind of quiet the chatter in my head with your brilliance. So thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, I'm seeing appreciation for Vanessa's optimism and encouragement. It's very important in the process. Yeah, Andrea for being solution forward. Jumping into the deep, Vanessa. Todd's clear and thoughtful suggestions. Dan and Annie for the brain science section. Holly for working on the forward. Yeah. Everyone for showing up and persisting. Create a document that captures what we believe is critical to moving the T-cell work in the state. The thoughtfulness of each participant in this process. Learning from one another, stretching my brain, different perspectives from different parts of the work. Great. Daniel for bringing humanity to this work. If you're not feeling alone in the journey, that was maybe Vanessa. Alexa. Great.
I'd like to throw in another one.
Yeah.
Which is just props to the ODE folks for like noticing, like, I don't know how you endeavor to do something you haven't done publicly, and like humility that takes to just try it. And, you know, from the community agreements, like missteps that kind of went, you know, and then recasting it. I appreciate you. I guess the humility and responsiveness, and that's hard. It's hard to do privately, and it's really hard to do publicly. That's where it gets really freaking brave. And regardless of where this goes, I appreciate that about you all. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Daniel. Second that for the ODE team, that humility is hard and important in this work, and jumping into a public process is no joke these days, especially. Great. All right. Thank you all for taking a moment to appreciate each other. I know it can feel like we're ready to be done, but also you did commit so much, and it's nice to spend a moment to just appreciate you all in this work and what you gave each other and what you gave this process, and hopefully what you're giving to students and educators in Oregon by setting up this framework and an initial recommendations for standards. So as we close, we do have a short survey for you that just asks a few questions if you have additional feedback for ODE, especially as they embark on a next group. Feedback about how this one or what they might want to think about for the next piece. And then there's a question in there about any recommendations for people you think should apply for the next phase. So for folks who are going to dig into the recommendations, if you have suggestions, especially for educators, practitioners, classroom educators, who you think should apply for that group, well, we've asked a question about that in the survey as well. And I'll turn it over to Vanessa.
It feels so wonderful to connect with each other as we start unravel group. I just want to these final thoughts.
Vanessa, you
Am
were
I frozen
for a second. Yes, you kind of froze. Your audio got garbly. You want to try again?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I just wanted to close out with these powerful words and books, and I actually came up with a poem in my NEA magazine. So the book goes out to all educators, and it just really resonated for our moment and our time together. And I'm getting a little emotional. I think that's what happens when you're on a journey even with people. So we are each other's harvest, we are each other's business, we are each other's magnitude and bond. And I just love that we're able to cultivate seeds for the future, for future students, the future phase of this group. And we've been in each other's business. We found a way to find and goals through transparency and honesty, and just shown up in that way. And then this idea of magnitude and bond, that I forged really wonderful connections with so many of you, that I'm really hopeful we can stay connected with each other as I go and learn into my role. I need you all. Please don't stay far to share things with me, and just invite you out if you want to talk with a partner. I'll need you, so I hope we can reach out to you all. And yeah, I really believe that the idea of magnitude, they're big, and what we're doing is big. And I have tremendous hope for the transformation that it can do for our schools and for our students and families and educators. So just deep thanks and appreciation for you all.
So we wanted to end our celebratory time today with one word and one breath. So if you'll take a moment to pause and include a word in the chat that surfaces for you as we say goodbye, that'd be great. Seeing appreciation, hopeful, lovely, persist, gratitude, hopeful, optimism. That's wonderful. Thank you. All right, so we just wanted to say thank you again for your passion, your commitment of time, and just always centering students at the heart of our work. And thank you for being a part of this process with us as we've continued to grow and improved along the journey. And then we're just really excited for next steps and what's coming, and just continuing the partnership, like Vanessa said. You know, we built the relationships with you, and just excited to see where our next steps go. So just thank you all for your time, and We're excited. Please reach out if you need anything or if you have questions, or if we could continue to connect, that'd be great too. So we'll say good night.